He kōna I purangi tēnei nā te reo irirangi o Aotearoa.
This is Mediawatch. I'm Colin Peacock. This week, the first new current affairs show for years on TV was launched, but did an hour of Patrick Gower get to the bottom of his issues?
People know that I've got issues. I've covered most of them publicly, so I do need to share not just the spotlight with some other journos, but with some issues that other Kiwis face as well.
But before that, could a Loafers Lodge type of tragedy strike in another of the unknown number of hostels around this country? 6 years after the Grenfell Tower tragedy in the UK, we asked journalists there who investigated that what our media can now do to make it a lot less likely here.
When I arrived down there, it was shortly before 3 a.m. this morning. The fire was still burning and in fact was very well alight until I left at about 4:30 this morning. Fire said that they did expect the fire to burn for some time, for several hours, as they were still trying to get it under control. They said it had reached the roofing area.
Almost 2 weeks have passed now since the terrible news that lives had been lost at the Loafers Lodge hostel in Wellington, in a blaze witnessed that night by RNZ News producer Denise Garland. And in the confusion and chaos of that night, a local fire chief told the media it was a once-in-a-decade fire, which gave people some idea of the seriousness of it, but somehow it still didn't quite adequately convey the horror of it. And it was only last Tuesday, more than a week later, that police formally released the names of the first 3 victims. In Parliament, Greens co-leader James Shaw last week said it was time for questions.
What kind of country are we where those people have so few options in life, but to live in substandard accommodation with a reasonable chance of lethality? What kind of country are we where we would not raise a building code because we're worried we might be accused of issuing a war on renters, on landlords? I think, what kind of country are we where, our firefighters lack or are at risk of not showing up with the most basic of equipment to be able to fight these kinds of events? So those questions do need to be answered, I think, in the fullness of time.
And asking those kind of questions of people in power is also, of course, the job of the media. Now, since the Loafers Lodge fire, we have learned a lot from reporters who have dug into it, some of it pretty worrying. For example, on the front page of Wellington's daily The Post last Monday, Tom Hunt reported that Loafers Lodge had just one working ground floor exit after the main entrance was locked shut due to damage in the days before the fire. And we've also learned that Loafers Lodge is just one of a growing network of hostels, motels and boarding houses housing some of New Zealand's most vulnerable and poorest people. But we don't even know how many of them there are. A parliamentary inquiry report into boarding houses cited MB and fire service databases, which suggested there were between 500 and 550 boarding houses, but that was done back in 2014. According to Stuff reporter Steve Kilgallen, the $300,000 cost of creating a national register was cited as a reason why it hadn't been done back in 2012. Journalist Bernard Hickey said the Loafers Lodge fire exposed our twin crises of inequality and housing, subjects he writes a lot about. Bernard Hickey said that he lived not far from Loafers Lodge for years and often wondered who lived there and what it was like to live there. But
like most, I didn't have much insight into the nature and danger of life inside such a place.
And Bernard Hickey's not alone in that among our journalists. But since the tragedy, our media have been talking to the people who are usually invisible in our media. For example, Loafers Lodge resident Chris told The Guardian's New Zealand reporter Tess McClure this.
I've read online and on social media saying that this was a place for the vulnerable. I don't consider myself a vulnerable person. It's just at the moment there's a struggle with housing.
And Loafers Lodge catered for people who couldn't buy their own homes in the capital or even rent them from other New Zealanders who own them. After National Party leader Christopher Luxon this week signalled a rethink of his party's support for changes to allow more and denser housing to be built, Newstalk ZB's Heather Duplessis-Allen said it was smart politics.
How good is it that National is walking away from the stupid housing density rules? I mean, they should never have even promoted this idea in the first place.
Though her panel guest at the time, political pundit Ben Thomas, cited Loafers Lodge when he told Heather Duplessis-Allen this.
Well, look, I think it was a good policy. We need more houses. We don't have enough houses.
Ben, it's not a good policy because normal people who own houses are not going to vote for this nonsense.
We have nurses living in places like Loafers Lodge. We need more houses.
Yes, but the nurse, when she owns a house, or he, is not going to want to vote for us.
Yeah, you don't have to tell me about the politics about it. I worked on the Wayne Brown campaign for mayor. I know very much how the good burgers of Auckland feel about their neighbours building high properties.
Elsewhere on News Talk ZB this week, the local host in Wellington, Nick Mills, asked the Wellington City Missioner Murray Edridge how accommodation can become healthier, safer and more affordable in Wellington, especially for those who are most vulnerable. And the property developer Ian Castles added this.
You know, if we keep growing poverty the way we are, then we're all stuffed. There's no quarantine. You can't live away from that and ignore it. We are as healthy as our society is, and if it's not working, it's not working.
And it's definitely not working.
No, it's not working at all. People are coming off the back of the train and we're just ignoring it.
And also this week, an episode of the daily podcast The Detail devoted an entire episode to the safety of denser housing and pointed out that RNZ's Phil Pennington had investigated this for RNZ.
So what happens is that the government goes, we want to intensify housing to meet the housing crisis. And they passed that all under urgency, right? So the floodgates were opened, but it seems as though they didn't really check downstream what was going on in terms of fire. We still have to determine how much official advice there was about fire, but what I'm hearing is that there wasn't a lot.
Now, the day after the fire at Loafers Lodge last week, RNZ's Phil Pennington told Morning Report what some of the firefighters had told him after the horror of confronting that blaze.
One of them said to me last night, I wonder if this is our Grenfell moment.
A reference to the Grenfell Tower disaster in which 72 people died in a fire in London in 2017. Now, the circumstances of that were very different to Loafers Lodge, but both disasters raised big questions about the adequacy of social housing provision and the response, or lack of it, to safety concerns of people living there and the capability of the emergency response. And in the UK, the role of the media, both before and after the Grenfell Tower disaster, has also been examined in the years since then.
You want the proof? Right, you didn't come here when people were telling you that the building was unsafe. That is not newsworthy. You come here when people die. Why?
Well, that was the sound of the veteran British Channel 4 news presenter Jon Snow being confronted by angry Grenfell Tower residents when he turned up there to report on the tragedy back in 2017. Now, later that year, Jon Snow told a conference of media people this about that moment.
We are all in this hall major players. We can accuse the political classes for their failures, and we do, but we're guilty of them ourselves. We are too far removed from those who lived their lives in Grenfell and who, across the country, now live on amid combustible cladding, the lack of sprinklers, the absence of centralised fire alarms and more revealed by the Grenfell Tower.
Well, some who did know about that and did reveal it before and after the fire, and are still doing it now, are the journalists at a specialist magazine and website called Inside Housing. Among them was Sophie Barnes, who said that they tried to get the national media interested in the problem of fire safety and social housing long before the Grenfell Tower disaster. She said what was reported as a horrific one-off at Grenfell Tower was actually a horrific example of a much wider problem.
This almost kind of fixation really on getting rid of these regulations, too much regulation, it stifles innovation. And when it comes to housing and safety and fire safety, it seems crazy.
Well, the 6th anniversary of the Grenfell Tower tragedy is coming up next week, and Sophie Barnes is now an investigative reporter for one of the UK's biggest national newspapers, the Daily Telegraph. But her colleague Peter Apps is still at Inside Housing. He's now its deputy editor, and he's still covering the inquiry into Grenfell Tower, which isn't expected to end until 2024. Last year, Peter Apps published Show Me the Bodies, How We Let Grenfell Happen, a book described by the Times in London as a forensic indictment of the construction industry and its regulators. So what advice does Peter Apps have for our media, trying to find the true meaning in a tragedy here, which could be a warning of others to come?
You get a kind of low probability event like this, or what I presume has happened in Wellington, but those come from a set of circumstances which make it possible. But it's likely that if that's possible in that one block, it's likely to be possible in others as well. It has to ask questions about the systems of prevention and protection that are supposed to prevent these sorts of incident happening, and how robust they are. Certainly in the UK, as that kind of has been unpicked by what we've written, what others have written, and by the inquiry, you see this failure to maintain basic protections at a number of levels. And once you've got that, then you can have a low probability event like this take place. Sometimes people sort of say that in the days and weeks immediately after an event like this, then you can't politicise it. You've got to just sort of, it's a tragedy. You've got to mourn first and then talk about the reasons afterwards. And I think that that's a mistake, to be honest, from the media's perspective, because there's a short period when people are listening and when they care, and that short window will close. And if you're not talking about the things that need to change at that time, you're going to find that you're talking about them at a time when nobody's listening to you.
Your colleague Sophie Barnes, for example, did sort of epic requests for official information, writing to hundreds of local authorities for the same information. Is that the level of inquiry you have to go to really build up a picture of where the risks are and what's working and what isn't?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't know what sort of freedom of information laws exist in New Zealand, but we do have a structure in the UK by which you can get information out of public bodies. It's quite laborious, and building up data is important in proving this idea that we were talking about just now, that this isn't just a one-off and actually is a product of an environment where lots of homes are unsafe. It's an important role the media can play.
Well, in the wake of the tragedy here in Wellington, we've now learned that there are more than 500 such boarding houses or hostels around the country, but we've discovered no register, no common set of standards. What advice would you give to our journalists that want to look into this and really inform the public what is out there in terms of social housing?
A sadly familiar story, really. I mean, the history of fire disasters in the UK going back a long time before Grenfell, they do always seem to take place in homes for the people with the least choice about where they live.
Yeah, there's a fascinating excerpt from a recent Inside Housing piece I found online about a building that you'd reported on earlier as not being up to scratch. And when Inside Housing visited the buildings later, there were some signs of improvement, but cigarette butts litter the windows. There's the smell of tobacco smoke in the air. At least one of the doors from the drying room to the main corridor doesn't close by itself. Panel doors on electricity boxes are made of tatty plywood, big gaps in the walls. So would you advise journalists to do this, to say, actually, we will go there, places that say they're going to be improved, we will go there, we will check?
Yeah, absolutely. If you can get down there. I mean, like, there's often that gap between you'll go to the landlord of the organisation at a press office and they'll give you assurances about how seriously they take safety, and you can test that and speak to the people who are in those buildings and ask them how they feel and whether when they complain about things it's taken seriously or not. I think that's absolutely a job that the media can do.
Yeah, and when the Grenfell disaster happened, some of the media were a bit shocked to find residents really resented them and felt that they hadn't been interested in them before, possibly had literally ignored newsworthy things they were trying to say about the safety of their buildings. John Snow, for example, veteran broadcaster on Channel 4, was really shocked by this and has later said, look, it was proof to me, if we needed it, that journalists are disconnected from the way that people in social housing live. Do you agree with him and his conclusion about that?
I mean, I think in the immediate aftermath of the fire, the community were obviously in such a state of trauma and devastation, and the UK media is pretty ferocious, will pursue stories and doesn't always treat people very well. That's going to create hostility towards the media in general, but I think sometimes these kind of differences between people can be overstated. When I've spoken to people who live in buildings, not just Grenfell, but other buildings, social housing blocks with fire safety issues, I find that for the most part, they want people to listen to them and want people to talk and understand. And I think you'd find, actually your background and your outlook on life is maybe a lot less different from them than you think. Probably, yeah, we don't, as a society, pay enough attention to people who are struggling. And actually, when you kind of go there as a human being and you want to kind of understand and listen, I'm sure the sort of journalists listening to this who've done kind of similar things in New Zealand would say the same.
I read that the final report of the Grenfell Tower inquiry won't actually be published until 2024, 7 years after the event.
Yeah, I mean, it's taken an extraordinarily long time. There's still hope that there's going to be criminal prosecutions, but none of those will come. until the inquiry report has been published and been analysed by prosecutors, and then the criminal trial start, and they would take a long time as well. So it means the people who suffered the fire are kind of locked into this decades-long legal processes before they get closure. You know, in some ways, the inquiry's done a good job of exposing this story of, you know, systemic failure. But 6-7 years is an extraordinarily long time to have to wait.
And finally, Peter, we don't have in New Zealand a publication quite like Inside Housing, just this real focus on this one area with expert journalists, which comes into its own when something like Grenfell happens. But seeing as we don't have that in New Zealand, would you urge media companies here to at least put a senior reporter on this and allow them to follow the story?
Yeah, look, I mean, one of the things I'd say, given what you're saying about this fire, we had a fire in 2009 in the UK, a building called Lacanau House, which killed 6 people, 3 of them children. And the story wasn't really followed up, to be honest. But the issues that caused the Lacanau House fire were so similar. And it's how I open my book, Show Me the Bodies, with an account of the Lacanau House fire. It's supposed to kind of make people think they're reading about Grenfell, and then they realise they're actually reading about a fire that happened 8 years before. If journalists in the UK had been able to get under the skin of that Lacanau House fire and expose what the lessons were, we might not have had the second catastrophe, which was much worse. You know, as bad as what's happened in Wellington is, you now have the opportunity to prevent that happening again, or prevent it happening in an even worse fashion. That's something that the media can contribute. Yes, absolutely. Newspapers should look at giving the reporter the space to stay with this story over the next few months and even years as the situation and the details emerge, because they won't have yet. It will take time. If the media is patient enough, there's probably a story there that matters a great deal.
That was Peter Apps, the deputy editor of the UK journal Inside Housing, who has for 6 years now been covering the Grenfell Tower tragedy and the official investigations and the inquiry into it, which is still ongoing. And Peter is also the author of the recently published account of all that called Show Me the Bodies, How We Let Grenfell Happen. This weekend, readers of newspapers and significant news media websites will have noticed a fair amount of backslapping in the form of prominently placed stories and supersized adverts, drawing attention to their successes and those of their stablemates in the annual Voyager Media Awards. Though those same stories usually don't mention much, or at all, the gongs picked up by rival media organisations and their journalists. Likewise, anyone following individual journalists on social media this weekend will have found the feeds of many clogged with expressions of congratulations or commiserations, maybe the odd gripe or two about inconsistencies in judging, and lots of posts about hangovers. But on the night before the morning after, there was also an announcement at Saturday's ceremony that journalists focused on business and economics would have really welcomed: a $2 million endowment to create the Brian Gaynor Business Journalism Initiative. Now, this comes from the Milford Foundation, the charitable arm of Milford Asset Management, of which Brian Gaynor was a founder. And also for years, he was the writer of incisive columns in the NBR, the New Zealand Herald, and more recently, subscription-based outlet Business Desk, which Brian Gaynor also backed financially and editorially until he died just over a year ago after a short illness. Brian Gaynor's wife Anna Gibbons says that the new initiative is a way to honour Brian's life, his devotion to public disclosure and high-quality analysis and news coverage of business and keeping the markets honest. Now, this is a significant sum to boost business journalism, and the first applications for the funds will be called for as soon as August, according to the organisers. So who and what are they actually looking to fund? Well, we'll look into that on Mediawatch next week, when the Media Awards, by the way, keep on coming. And next Thursday, it's the New Zealand Radio Awards, so stand by for more backslapping stories and ads in your media in the days ahead. Last week, the government presented a budget that wasn't quite the election year lolly scramble that many pundits had predicted. And in this week's Midweek Media Watch on Nights with Mark Leishman last Wednesday here on RNZ National, I looked at how the media responded to that, and also to one man who was billed on TV as a middle-income concerned Kiwi, but who appeared to have political allegiances of his own.
Steve was really keen on a tax cut.
They call it the bread and butter budget, but to be honest with you, it's not going to help anybody with bread and butter when they're standing at the supermarket aisle with still no money in their pockets.
On Midweek Media Watch, I also looked at a ruling from a media watchdog that's a bit of a warning about airing the grievances of people unhappy with agencies of state, and a new movie that was panned in the Herald as the worst of the year already.
I need the greatest basketball shoe that's ever been made.
Who's the player?
Michael Jordan.
And it turns out that's not the only movie lately about great marketing triumphs of corporates who crank out consumer goods. And last Wednesday on Midweek Media Watch, we also looked at the yarn that burst into the headlines here last Monday, but nowhere else around the world, the plight of poor old Paora the Kiwi at Zoo Miami, which is now mortified about his treatment.
I mean, if a Kiwi was seen, mishandling a bald eagle, I'm sure Americans here would not be nearly as polite and as kind and as understanding as the Kiwis have been.
Turned out, though, not everyone was all that polite or forgiving in the case of Eagle versus Kiwi in Miami this past week. If you missed Midweek Media Watch this week, you can catch up with all that on our page of the RNZ website, our section of the RNZ app, or you'll find it in our podcast feed. Just look for the title, Midweek Media Watch, Miami, Not Nice. If you turn the clock back between, say, 15 or 20 years, the top-rating national TV channels all wanted a slice of the current affairs action in prime time on weekdays. While TV2 was showing Shortland Street each night, TV1 had Holmes, and after that, Close Up with Mark Sainsbury, after Prime TV paid a small fortune to lure Paul Holmes for a 7 p.m. show to compete with it. And in 2005, TV3 launched Campbell Live to extend the range and reach of its news presenters, John Campbell and Carol Hirschfeld. But over time, serious current affairs issues in the evenings got watered down with the likes of The Story, The Project and 7 Sharp on at 7 p.m. But last Wednesday night, the Discovery-owned TV channel 3 launched the first new primetime current affairs show for years. And as Hayden Donnell now reports, this weekly effort seeks to blend current affairs and comedy.
Hello Kiwis, I'm Paddy Gower and I have got issues. On this show,
So began Paddy Gower Has Issues. The show follows the eponymous Gower and his colleagues as they address their gripes, grievances and concerns about the way New Zealand works. Those embuggerances range from the major.
Tonight my issue is with reading. We are failing at it. In fact, we actually suck.
To the more minor.
I had an email in from a good friend of mine, Zoe, who's got a real issue with the music they play at the supermarkets. So,
Most of the show's first episode was centred on those two issues. The meaty technical investigation into our falling reading rates and literacy education was carried out by Gower's co-host, the News Hub presenter Laura Tupou. She interviewed school teachers, principals, students and academics to build the case for classrooms to adopt a structured rather than balanced method of reading education. Now that might sound a little academic, but interviews like this one with some Mahurangi College students made the story personal.
Why do you want to know how to read?
It makes life simpler. I don't have to ask my mum all the time, how do I spell this? Can you read this for me?
Meanwhile, Karen O'Leary delved deeper than anyone ever has before into Countdown Spotify playlists on behalf of the aforementioned Zoe. Here she is speaking to a Danish academic who's spent 30 years studying the effects of music on shopping habits.
what say I wanted to make someone buy mints? If I had them just hearing the word mints on repeat over and over and over again, do you think that would work?
That's a good question.
O'Leary carried out an experiment to test that theory, sending 3 shoppers around a countdown with headphones playing different soundtracks, one happy, one sad, and one with the word mints on repeat. Unfortunately, there was a flaw in the operation.
Karen, I have to know, did she buy mints?
No, it turns out she's actually vegan.
The contrast between those two topics would be stark at the best of times, but it was made even starker by the show's unique structure, which saw Tupou and O'Leary's investigation spliced together in 4 sections across the course of its hour-long runtime. Now, that made for a few abrupt changes in tone, but the transitions between light and shade were generally pretty smooth. Part of that is thanks to the show's host, who successfully mixed serious and silly in this segment, defending a now-aborted feral cat-killing competition for kids in North Canterbury.
I need to be clear here. I am not against moggies or any house cats. I understand that your cat Twinkles or Misty is special. But feral cats are not special. They need to die. And that's why I have no issues whatsoever with the North Canterbury hunting competition, and I hope that Rotherham School gets its pull.
In-house comedians Eli Matthewson and Courtney Dawson also helped navigate the shifts from literacy to levity, serving as a kind of younger, less muppety Statler and Waldorf.
I've looked at the reading test. I even did some of it. I read 4 paragraphs from basketballer Stephen Adams' book and answered some multi-choice questions about it. And I'm sad to say it's actually kind of easy, and our 15-year-olds should not be failing this. They should have the reading skills to pass this, and we are failing them if they can't.
Oh, Patty, it's cool you got to do the test. Did you get any NCA credits for doing it?
When they weren't heckling Gower, the pair were charged with delivering comedic takes on the news of the day. Some of those jokes got a little spicy.
The only other country to never have a reported case is China. If Tokelau is only finding out about COVID now, then they're going to be really sad in 3 years when they find out that the Queen has died. You know what? It's been a busy couple of years for COVID. I think that it deserves a tropical getaway.
Yeah, I can't wait to see COVID with a tan.
I'm old enough to remember when COVID infiltrating a Pacific island for the first time wasn't really a rich vein of comedy. Times have changed. Admittedly, international news with its bounty of horrors can make for tricky source material. A local news segment later in the show made for safer and arguably funnier ground.
Thank you, Patty. Well, it's been a huge week for big nerds because the new budget was announced. They always give it a fun nickname, so what do they call it this time?
The government sold this as a bread and butter budget.
Bread and butter.
Bread and butter. Bread and butter. Bread and butter.
Bread and butter budget.
Oh, la-dee-da. Someone can afford butter.
All in all, a successful debut for what will be a weekly hour of Gower and Friends. I asked the show's host about some of the editorial decisions that went into the first episode and why it's taken so long to get current affairs back on primetime. Kia ora, Patrick, and welcome to Mediawatch.
It's actually really good to be here.
It's a bit of a tonal tightrope, right? It's a mixture of the serious and the not so serious, the light and the dark. You got the funny news segments, and then you have a technical investigation into literacy education. Like, how much thought did you guys put into how to balance those two shades?
There's probably no way to put into words how long that took from the conception of the program, which was in about November last year, so for about 6 months. That's the format that we've got, where we're going to mix serious investigations into big issues with some less serious investigations and some actual hard-out comedy as well. So the tonal tightrope is something I've got to live on, and I've got my arms out balancing here in the studio. We believe that that's a model where people can get hard investigations, good conversations about issues facing New Zealand, and have some fun as well. And we feel that's a way that we can, I hate to say it, but, make people sort of take their medicine with a little bit of sugar, I think is the saying. We're competing with the likes of, we are literally competing with MasterChef Australia and the Celebrity Chase, and we're competing with people's time, we're competing with TikTok and all this other stuff. If people watch the show that's just been, we did an investigation into literacy in New Zealand, which is about as hard-hitting and as complex as you can take on in terms of journalism. So we never considered a real hardcore, constant current affairs kind of program like what people might have been used to seeing with 60 Minutes and Third Degree on TV3 or on Sunday or anything like that. Did that for about 15, 16, 17 years of journalism, being serious all the time, and the last few years where I've let my funny side come out, I've enjoyed a lot more, and so the show was always going to have a bit of that as well.
I worked for Newsworthy. Do you remember Newsworthy?
I remember it well, and I loved it.
Because that was the tonal tightrope possibly gone a bit wrong. You had Sam Hayes doing a really serious news up front, and then you had David Farrier getting half naked and interviewing Colin Craig in a sauna. So that was a tough balance to strike. Do you worry that you might, be a bit newsworthy?
Yeah, I don't actually. I think if I end up in a sauna with a politician and it becomes one of the most iconic interviews in the history of New Zealand television, then I'll be walking the tonal tightrope just fine, because David's interview with Colin Craig was about her. And as for Samantha, she's actually going to be on the show this week. She's done an investigation for us, and she'll be working with us, so she'll be back on that tonal tightrope. We just took the tonal tightrope that you guys had put away in the cupboard, and we tied it up again.
The thing that you've done that is quite innovative is that it's not just Laura Tupou doing her very technical and quite well done investigation into literacy in one segment and then the comedy in another segment. They're interwoven across the show in a way that I'm not sure I've seen before.
It hasn't been done before, that's a fact, because we looked at nearly every kind of show that was anything like this around the world, including in Warner Brothers Discovery, which owns 3, which has got a whole lot of programs across CNN and everything. There's nothing like it there. There's no other format when we looked in similar countries like Australia, Canada, the UK and the US. So that's something that we've come up with at 3. TV3's got a long history in comedy. It's part of our DNA. We're the home of comedy in New Zealand television, and obviously we've had 3 News and News Hub. So we've taken those 2 bits of DNA and we have literally mixed them, and the format that people see, where we do literally have them as like strands of a rope, I guess, through the program. And I'm super proud of that. From now on, we're on a weekly turnaround, and we've got the same format to work with week in, week out. So we only have a few days to do each time, but we believe that it can work. That's why we've done it, and people want to come on a journey with both stories, both the hard news investigation or the more comedic one done by Karen O'Leary.
The format has issues. Is that limiting in any way? Because it has to be stuff that you have issues on. Could it be that you're kind of limited to stuff that you're aggrieved over?
Yeah, well, we did think about calling it personal grievance in terms of PG. I'm just joking. We never did. But
you never did that?
No.
It's actually pretty good.
Yeah,
Patrick Gower, personal grievance.
It is good. Maybe I might write that down afterwards and later on. And
that's Mediawatch intellectual property now.
Yeah. But yeah, we don't want it to be grievance based, and I'm putting quote marks around that, because grievance is, it's quite a harsh word. I prefer issues, but journalism is sometimes based around taking up someone's grievance and looking for answers for them, but it's not going to limit us. Issues is a pretty broad word, and we're not going to be limited to just grievance journalism all the time. What we want is there to be a lot of solutions, and we saw solutions in the literacy story. There is a type of teaching literacy that is a potential solution. We saw the Minister for Education say that she wants us to adopt that in all our schools. That's a solution. So maybe, it should have been called PG Has Solutions. But I don't know. It's too late to change it now.
I'm really sorry that this revelation has come to you at this point.
I wish I'd done this interview last week or a few weeks ago.
You could have really changed things.
Yeah.
So what you're talking about there almost is almost reminiscent of Fair Go, right?
Yeah, I mean, Karen's, as people would have seen, she took up a grievance about supermarket music on behalf of someone. It's an amalgam of different ways of doing television journalism, and it's got a little bit of everything in it.
So who decides the issues? Are they all just your issues, or are they being decided by a News Hub executive somewhere?
We all decide. I mean, obviously, I've got a massive say. Our executive producer, John Bridges, has also got a massive say, and so does Todd Simmons, who's one of the bosses at News Hub. And so do the team that work on it. I'm sorry if this is kind of starting to turn into a boring answer, but, we kind of work through them. I mean, they ultimately start with me, and lots of people come up to me and talk to me wherever I am about things that they think I should be investigating or things that are good ideas to investigate, and that's really the main start for me, the people that come up and talk to me.
So they're mainly your issues. They will be mainly Patrick Gower's issues.
Yeah, well, they'll be all of our issues. I mean, I think if you came and saw the list of things we're doing, there'd be no great surprises that they're things that are of concern to Kiwis. They're things.
Can you give us some hints about what's coming up?
No, I can't. But they would be exactly the same as anything that anybody who wanted to brainstorm, around our health system, around our education system, disparities in the economy, social issues, all of these sorts of things. I don't want to give away what we're doing on a media show. That would be absolutely stupid. But I nearly did it. I nearly did it then, but I managed to resist. I think if this show does get another hoon, which I hope it does, we've got 20 shows to do this year. There's more than enough issues to keep us going. I did a rough back of the sort of Weet-Bix packet estimation that on the issues that I think New Zealand are facing, we could have 17 seasons.
Okay.
Yeah, so...
Okay. Yes. We're crossing live to Patrick Gower from his retirement village. He's still solving them.
Yeah.
Okay. Like, you're pushing an issue uphill every week, though. Is there something that feels a little bit daunting about that? News shows, they just get to go with whatever the breaking news of the day. It's swimming with the current.
Yep, and it is daunting, actually. But it's new and it's different and it's a challenge. That's why I can't resist it. Like, I actually really like that. That's what gets me up in the morning and gets me going.
You were quite public when you quit the gallery that you burned out. I think there's sort of words that you're almost losing your mind. You've got a lot on. You've got the documentary series that's still going, and you've got this. Like, are you worried that you've taken on something that's too daunting?
Nope. I've taken on the job that, one of these jobs that I reckon I was meant to do. The stuff that we're facing in New Zealand and trying to help and trying to make the country a little bit better. I can think of nothing more that I'd want to be doing. I had a mental breakdown in the gallery from overwork, stress, and, being in an incredibly negative environment. I might be a little stressed with this job because I'm worried about doing a good job. But it's incredibly energising to be out with the people of New Zealand and see and hear the things that they're worried about and try and help them. So doesn't mean that it's not thrilling as well.
Is that economic environment one of the reasons why this is the first new current affairs show in quite some time? That it's tough to make, it's expensive to make this kind of show.
Yep, and I think it's been about 7 years since we had Third Degree, which was our last iteration of this. They are tough to make, but for me, the chance to bring it back to TV3 was one of the main motivators, just to get these kinds of stories like what people saw on Wednesday night, literacy, back into prime time, back front and centre, investigations and like that after a 7-year break on the network. We have to get this stuff back out there. It's not just for TV3, it's not just for me. They're actually for the people that are out there, and we've got 1 year to try and make it work and show the bosses that people want to watch it. And it's my job now to get those people to watch it, to make something good enough so that we can come back for another year with these kind of stories.
Your documentary show is called Patrick Gower on whatever, weed.
Yes.
This one's called Paddy Gower Has Issues. Can you explain why this is Paddy Gower and the other one is Patrick Gower?
Well, this is actually a serious question because this goes to the heart of the marketing department at Warner Brothers Discovery, who believe that the use of Patrick for the documentaries and Paddy for the show creates some differentiation in the brands.
So people approaching the show, they'll be like, isn't this by the same guy that does Paddy Gower Has Issues? And then another person will say, no,
yeah, but
this is Patrick. This is the Patrick.
But deep
this
in
is
their,
Patrick Gower.
Deep in their subconscious, they'll be feeling something. And the documentaries that I do, which I'm still doing, by the way, a much, much deeper level of research, heavier investment of time and a heavier investment of skill in the directing and the cinematography. So, the more formal name Patrick does fit quite nicely with them. Being a company man at the moment, I can see you.
Oh, no, you've done an admirable job for Warner Discovery.
Warner Brothers Discovery.
Warner Brothers Discovery. I really apologise for getting that wrong. Now, despite the title, there's actually, I was surprised by how little Patrick Paddy Gower was actually in the Paddy Gower Hour.
Yes.
It was really a star term for Laura Tupou, Karen O'Leary.
Yes.
The comedians Courtney and Eli.
I'm happy to see the spotlight to people like you just mentioned. Laura Tupou, she's one of the great talents and reporters that we've got, and it was awesome to see her step up on a massive investigation. Karen O'Leary, it should be called Karen O'Leary on Issues. I wouldn't be surprised if season 2, if she takes over.
Because that has been a criticism of some of your documentaries, a bit too much Patrick Gower front and centre every so often. Was that something that you're wary of there?
No, I'm not wary of putting myself front and centre. People know that I've got issues. I've covered most of them publicly, so I do need to share not just the spotlight with some other journos, but with some issues that other Kiwis face as well. And people are going to see a lot of me. I've been in the Hawke's Bay filming a story last week. I've been in Gisborne filming something yesterday. I'm back out there. There'll be plenty of Gower in that hour as we go on. But it's going to be awesome to share the stage with, like I said, Sam Hayes is coming up this week. A whole lot of other News Hub journalists are going to be coming through as we go. And
we all have issues.
Yeah, anyone who's got issues is welcome.
This is just part of a larger media round for you, and you have to go pretty personal in some of these. You were personal with the promotion of the documentaries. You're personal when you left the gallery about the mental health issues you had there. Is that hard to constantly go into that stuff?
It is at times, and it's, I've made those choices. I made a documentary about being an alcoholic. I was upfront, and I have been upfront and open that I had a mental breakdown after working in the gallery. These are hard things to talk about, and when you've got your name on a show, like that's, I know that for some people that would be like a dream and different things, but, when you look up at it, it's pretty horrifying at times. You do get a really, really, I'll be honest, you do get a really, really big ego in this kind of job. I've suffered from that as well, having a big ego and thinking, that you're the greatest and all that sort of stuff. And none of that really is going to help me here. What I've got to do here is focus on getting these issues out and doing these stories in a good way. What's going to help me here is keeping calm. And forgetting about all of that sort of extra jazz and focusing on doing a good job of the issues for the people that decide to come on the program and share their stories. I've got to keep all of the ego and all of that sort of stuff out to one side and keep really calm and make the show a success and ensure that it's renewed for me and the team and the people that watch it. It is tricky, and I'm a professional and I'm good at it. But it doesn't mean it's not hard for me. It doesn't mean I have to spend a lot of time thinking about how I'm going to handle it and how I'm going to deal with it. I don't know if I've quite answered the question there, but it's hard.
I mean, some people would get a kick out of talking about themselves.
Yep. And
I think I probably would.
Yeah.
Do you not?
And definitely at times you do, and it's also it's a double-edged sword though, if I'm honest. There's thrilling parts of it, and it's like it is incredibly proud when I see my name literally in lights on my show. Like, there is no question about that. I'm so proud for everything that I've achieved, and I know how hard I've worked for it. I've got the battle scars to prove it. I'm proud for my family and my friends and everybody that supported me. But at the same time, once that switches off and there's all of the pressures of dealing with it and stuff like that, and your own ego and the worries about whether the show is going to get renewed and everybody's going to have their jobs again and all that sort of stuff. Like, there's sometimes when you wish that you didn't have that as well.
And sometimes you just want to go into a shack in the wilderness and
as long as
not have Mediawatch asking you questions.
Oh no, as long as I could get Mediawatch on a Sunday morning, that'd be good.
Yeah, I think we are available in all places. If you check the AM frequency, we should be there. Thank you very much, Patrick Gower.
Thank you very much for having me on Mediawatch, Hayden.
That was Patrick Gower, host of the new current affairs show Paddy Gower Has Issues, talking there to Mediawatch's Hayden Donnell about the tricky business of blending current affairs and comedy in prime time. Paddy Gower Has Issues screens every Wednesday for the next 20 weeks on 3 at 7:30pm, and it's available after that on the on-demand service 3Now. And you'll also find clips of the show on TikTok and other social media platforms if a whole hour of Gower on TV is a bit too much for you. Well, that's all we have for you on Media Watch this weekend, but we'll be back with more on the media after the 10 p.m. news next Wednesday with Midweek Media Watch on nights, and then back again at the same time next weekend with Media Watch here on RNZ National.